Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Hey guys, I'm out of breath. I was running and dancing. Industrialization of war. Let's learn. My name's Connor. If you're new, I like to learn things. If you're not ready to learn, you're in the wrong class. Get out. Or sit in the back. That's fine. Let's go. The industrialization of war. Cool. Or not cool, but kind of cool.
On September 15th, 1916, the whirl of machinery and the clank of metal filled the early morning air as the citizens of Chilwell, England, went about their work. Across the English Channel, the product of Chilwell's burgeoning factory was slammed into an artillery tube and hurled across the horizon. Arcing high above the ground, this explosive consequence of the industrial age passed over many of its manufactured contemporaries. Despite rolling off different assembly lines, these new instruments of war contributed to a single method of production, one that was turning untold millions into corpses.
Guys, could you put fins on the round? I'm assuming the answer is no, but I don't know why. Could you put fins on the round and then put grooves in the gun barrel so that the round can fit into the barrel, and then have it shoot out? Like, maybe that's a stupid question. I don't know. It entered my mind. Okay, sorry.
Of war contributed to a single method of production, one that was turning untold millions into corpses. These weapons and the devastation that they unleashed on the European continent were a result of over a century of transformations ushered in by the Industrial Revolution. Following a gradual accumulation of innovations, most notably the steam engine, humanity achieved a cascading series of technological breakthroughs that transformed human capabilities. With new sources of energy from burning fossil fuels, machine power replaced muscle power, and goods could be produced at a previously unimaginable scale. As these advancements spread throughout the world, they brought with them a series of social changes. Most notably, new centers of manufacturing required large workforces, which led to a population explosion in cities. As people flocked from the countryside to work in booming factories, new technologies allowed for a dwindling number of farmers to provide for this skyrocketing population. For urban workers, the daily rhythm of life stopped following the seasonal flow of agriculture altogether. Instead, millions began to dance to the unrelenting heartbeat of steam.
It is pretty insane how non-linear human technology is over time. Like the non-linear human technological improvement is over time. And sometimes not even that it's non-linear, it actually goes down, like after the collapse of the Roman Empire, after the Bronze Age collapse, and how in just 100 years you can see more change in technology and then society than in millennia before that. How just like one invention, I was about to say little invention, but steam engine is not a little invention, can cascade into just society being unrecognizable just a lifetime ago.
Society began to dance to the unrelenting heartbeat of steam. The societal transformation brought about by the Industrial Revolution quickly reverberated through the halls of government. The wealth created by industry allowed for countries to rapidly grow their economies, even if they lacked direct access to natural resources. Even more importantly, the Industrial Revolution provided states with the technology to control their swelling populations. sprawling bureaucracies could now reach across entire nations and mobilize their inhabitants at will. Steam power had created government power. Nonetheless, the Industrial Revolution's impact on war was initially variable. Though Napoleon harnessed the power of the state,
Instant communication. I say this all the time. I think that's like the most insane achievement ever. Is just like, hey, how's it going? Do this, this, this. All right, bye. Hey, this is happening over here right now. Oh, all right. Okay, do this. Bye. Like that, the ability to do that. I say this a lot, but I think it might be bigger than the steam engine, but just being able to coordinate things and see how things are happening in real time.
Nonetheless, the
Crazy.
Industrial Revolution's impact on war was initially variable. Though Napoleon harnessed the power of the state to conscript massive armies at the turn of the 18th century, some rulers in the 19th century were eager to return to the status quo and preferred smaller forces whose loyalty could be assured. Similarly, military planners throughout the 19th century were often reluctant to commit to new tactics or technology. Deep tradition and the steep cost of rearmament could keep militaries rooted in the past, even as humanity barreled toward the future. Regardless of tradition, the fist of industry was squeezing the art of war, and by the middle of the 19th century, the pressure became impossible to ignore. The 12-year period between 1853 and 1865 saw both the Crimean War and the American Civil War erupt into a cacophony of destruction. From the cholera-ridden outskirts of Sevastopol to the cratered fields of Gettysburg, combatants saw only death around them. But something else entirely was slowly becoming visible, a roadmap to industrial war. At first, this military revolution was most apparent at sea, where the navies of industrial empires deployed steamships that gave them an advantage in conflicts against those who did not embrace industrialization. Furthermore, the potency of modern seaborne artillery was thoroughly demonstrated in 1853 when a Russian fleet in the Black Sea shredded an Ottoman flotilla with explosive shells. The race to develop the next generation of warships began. Guns were upgraded.
Explosive shells, so they didn't have those prior to that. They didn't have those in the 1700s and early 1800s. So it was more just the impact of the round and the giant splinters it sends across to kill people. But now you have them actually exploding on impact, creating giant structural damage and sinking ships. I don't know why I figured... Am I not understanding that correctly?
Steam power continued to replace sails, and navies around the world began to experiment with armored warships. The first
And ships became way less cool, in my opinion.
clash of these reinforced vessels occurred less than a decade later during the American Civil War, when two ironclads belonging to the Union and Confederacy met near Hampton Roads. Anticlimactically, these steam-powered ships pounded each other for hours without success, undeniably proving the worth of their armor in the process. The world took notice, and warships would never look the same again.
Guys, I realized just...
We're
Oh,
making
I thought that was a... Oh, it is an advertisement, but my YouTube Premium has not been... The weird payment, I have to fix it. But I keep realizing just how lucky the United States was to be created. Like, all of its circumstances were so lucky. You were an offshoot colony that got independence from the most powerful and technologically advanced power in the world at the time, the British. You were now on a land that was giant oceans away from the main powers that could do harm to you and take your territory. and you had an enormous amount of land that you could cultivate yourself without much interference from others. Obviously, there were the Spanish, the French, and the British, but they had other things to worry about, and they couldn't, you know. And the United States was created and became a power during a time where industrialization was becoming a thing. Just so many perfect circumstances that seemed to make it inevitable that the United States would become very powerful.
Notice, and warships would never look the same again. We're making a new video game, Master of Command. Wishlist it on Steam and join its Discord in the description below. Master of Command takes place in the mid-18th century and puts you in the shoes of a commander. You lead your own personalized army, whose regiments can be fully customized, down to the flags they carry, the weapons they use, and even the color on their uniform. You take your men through increasingly difficult, randomly generated military campaigns. The battles are real.
I love the Austrian uniforms, like the nice white and red.
You can configure your own formations, firing methods, and even the types of musket balls your troops fire. With 150 unique units to command and 5 different major nations, there is endless replayability. Wishlist now on Steam, and don't forget to join the Discord to learn more about the game.
Cool.
On land, new weapons were also making the battlefield deadlier. Rifling added grooves to the barrels of muskets, which allowed bullets to be shot further and more accurately. Later, breech loading was introduced, which allowed guns to be reloaded much faster from their rear. In just a few decades, rifle fire became 30 times more accurate. New production techniques allowed these...
Question. So, did it essentially go for both ships and land armies from... Well, going from the introduction of gunpowder weapons, guns, but they really weren't that reliable, and so you still needed archers and armor and stuff like that. And then they got a little bit better, and they switched to more mobilized giant shotguns on both land and sea, where you still had to like maneuver as one cohesive unit because the accuracy and power just wasn't there yet. And so even though you eventually transferred to like all gunpowder weapons with bayonets now, you still weren't accurate or enough yet to have what you had in the late 1800s and then definitely early 1900s, to where now things were so accurate, powerful, that it was just stupid to now be in these cohesive units marching and then reaching the other army and then blasting each other to pieces. And so the Crimean War and American Civil War were kind of in that transition of old world tactics, but with more new weaponry, where you finally clashed and it was just complete bloodshed. And then that forced people to no longer march in any formations that were recognizable to the previous 100 years of warfare. Does that make sense? Am I getting...
weapons to be
I meant that to be phrased as sort of a question.
Produced as more accurate. New production techniques allowed these weapons to be produced at staggering speed, affordably arming massive armies of conscripts. In the late 18th...
And just like with ships, rather than like going towards each other and then maneuvering and getting right beside each other and then firing like giant shotguns, now I can just lob stuff at you without really even seeing you very well. Sorry, all right, back.
Fortune techniques allowed these weapons to be produced at staggering speed, affordably arming massive armies of conscripts. In the late 1840s, it would take upwards of 30 years to equip an army with rifles. In 1866, it could be done in 4. Faced with withering fire from the infantry, cavalry soon became almost obsolete, although commanders were slow to notice this. Artillery, on the other hand, gained new importance. In the aftermath of the American Civil War, the Prussians proved the effectiveness of steel breech-loaded artillery, which were faster firing, lighter, more accurate, and more mobile than their predecessors. More importantly, the momentum of industrialization assured that they could be produced in massive quantities. This revolution in small arms and artillery shifted the balance of warfare in ways that military leaders were tragically slow to notice. Defenders now reigned supreme. With rapidly firing rifles and accurate artillery, frontal assaults became akin to death sentences. Nevertheless, commanders had often not adapted their tactics to new technology and continued to order head-on engagements throughout both the Crimean War and American Civil War.
So industrialization allowed us to make such an enormous amount of guns, and we created better guns that old tactics met good weapons.
In 1855,
I'm
Russian troops
repeating
suffered
myself.
10,000 casualties in just 5 hours while attacking fortified British positions. 8 years later, Confederate forces at Gettysburg attempted a similar maneuver and lost 7,500 men in less than an hour. Defenders soon realized the advantage they held and began to dig in. By the end of the American Civil War, combat in the Eastern Theater had devolved into trench warfare. The mass introduction of breech-loading rifles shortly following the war further advantaged defenders by allowing them to shoot and reload while laying down. By the 1870s, European powers were forced to emphasize brief, overwhelming offensives while fighting amongst themselves. Defenders could not be given the time to organize. As battlefields transformed into slaughterhouses, the railroad made it ever easier to dispatch increasing numbers of men to their doom. At 15 times the speed of marching, steam-powered trains could deliver supplies and soldiers over great distances at unprecedented speeds. Once again, Prussia led the way and transported 12,000 soldiers by rail as early as 1846. The American Civil War decisively proved that railways had become key to the conduct of modern warfare, with the more industrialized North making key use of its railway networks to assist with supplies and logistics.
What am I fair to say that the introduction of guns in battle was actually way less significant and game-changing than the increased effectiveness of guns during the Industrial Revolution? Because when I think about it, I'm like, you have a gun now that's such a game changer, but they didn't seem to be good enough and reliable and accurate and powerful enough and reusable to really change that much of warfare. I know Gustavus Adolphus was pretty key, father of modern warfare, but that didn't change things as much as just making much better guns.
Other nations were quick to glean this lesson, and by 1870, Prussia deployed well over 450,000 troops by rail to France in just 18 days. In addition to transporting soldiers, railways allowed factories far from the front lines to supply armies continuously throughout a conflict.
I feel like trains were super overpowered, like became much less powerful with the introduction of airplanes, right? Because prior to airplanes, the only way for you to destroy the tracks, because that's what I see a giant weakness of trains is, well, you can only go on the tracks that are placed down. If I destroy the tracks, then the train can't go anywhere. But your only way to destroy the train tracks prior to any means like an airplane of going beyond enemy lines would be to hit it directly with artillery, which that's as far as you can shoot the projectile and how accurately you can shoot it. And so clearly it was
Civilian
much more
factory
effective.
workers and
Or trains were much less open to being
the
destroyed.
larger economy of the entire nation played an increasingly important role in warfare. This set of realities gave rise to the concept of total war in the mid-19th century, where the entire resources of a state could be devoted to a single military conflict.
It's not just army against army, it's
Unfortunately, this concept also made every citizen and every piece of private property
Fair game.
a potential target of war
Yeah.
to be destroyed ruthlessly and without remorse. As the importance of industry to warfare became increasingly clear, political and military leaders soon realized that military victory could be achieved in factories long before it was achieved on the battlefield. The mass mobilization
It's a
of
numbers
industry
game.
for war was first realized in the American Civil War, where the Union was able to effectively leverage their existing advantages in manufacturing to rapidly increase their production of weapons. Industrial power and technologies also allowed European powers to project their influence all around the world. Steam-powered navies stoked the growth of maritime empires, and the railroad brought European colonialism inland. It was in these foreign invasions that Europe tested its most disruptive weaponry, such as the machine gun. Industrial war fueled Europe's conquest of the world. As Europe turned its weapons outward, conflict on the continent itself became rarer, but that was about to change.
He went on a smurfing spree.
As the 19th century came to a close, the disparate elements of industrial warfare were slowly converging. States possessed more power than ever to mobilize their populations and industries for war. New weapons and technologies allowed for conflicts to be fought with ever-increasing scope and ferocity, and the line between civilian and soldier was becoming increasingly blurred. As the world feverishly armed itself, humanity appeared to be just one shot away from Armageddon. On June 28, 1914, a Serbian nationalist assassinated the Archduke of Austria, and Europe was plunged into war. As soldiers across the continent marched off to battle in their brightly colored uniforms and cloth hats, many were confident that the war would be over by Christmas. 4 years later, these same men would be huddling in blasted-out craters with steel strapped to their heads. What had happened in between was war on an industrial scale. From the onset of the conflict, Germany hoped that launching a lightning advance into France and Belgium would help them avoid a two-front war with Russia. Unfortunately for the Kaiser, the defensive advantage of industrial warfare had grown even more pronounced since the last conflicts his forces had fought. Trench systems more stout and extensive than anything seen before soon snaked from the Alps to the English Channel. Mass-produced barbed wire provided yet one more obstacle. Forward momentum was impossible. A key asset of defenders everywhere was the machine gun. Properly introduced in the late 19th century, these weapons could fire hundreds of rounds per minute and tear through advancing infantry with ease.
Guys, this kind of makes sense how the German approach to war in the beginning of World War II just makes so much sense, because once the country you're fighting against, or the two countries fighting against each other, get mobilized enough, it's almost impossible to stop anything. And so the only way to secure victory with all of these amazing weapons is to just catch them by surprise and just thrust through before they get a chance to settle in, right? Blitzkrieg.
Provided yet one more obstacle. Forward momentum was impossible. A key asset of defenders everywhere was the machine gun. Properly introduced in the late 19th century, these weapons could fire hundreds of rounds per minute and tear through advancing infantry with ease. Though commanders initially worried that machine guns would prove to be nothing more than a waste of ammunition, the power of industry provided gunners with an unprecedented number of bullets. In turn, the machine gun provided its naysayers with an unprecedented number of corpses, grim evidence of its effectiveness. As the war dragged on, and its scope increased to a horrifying size, states began to implement total war concepts. Industry was expanded and aimed squarely at the war effort. Mass conscription was introduced to swell the size of the armed forces, and rail cars were commandeered, filled with supplies, and sent to the front. If the state willed it, national policies could be wholly devoted to perpetuating the slaughter abroad. In the hopes of ending the war quickly, all sides began to turn to new technologies. Barely 10 years after their invention, airplanes crisscrossed the skies conducting reconnaissance and artillery spotting. Later in the war, large bombers even began to appear over London. Though their breakneck development was impressive, airplanes proved unable to significantly alter the course of the war. The search for new technology would have to continue. The development of artillery proved to be decisive in the First World War. New industrial techniques allowed for the production of heavy guns to be scaled up, providing armies with the firepower to blast trench systems into oblivion. New shrapnel shells directed slivers of steel directly onto the heads of advancing infantry, forcing militaries to adapt protective headwear. Later, shells filled with poison gas were unleashed, spurring the adoption of the gas mask.
Okay, guys. So it seems like we've reached a level of weapons in the nuclear weapon where it doesn't really matter anymore, seemingly, how much better you are than the other person, because they have a technology that they will send in a ballistic missile, and they'll send a ton of them. And even if you can destroy them more, you are going to be very, very much destroyed as well. And so that's a weapon where you can't really learn from it, because when you use it, you're kind of done with. And so the only two ways I can think of minimalizing that would be researching ways to minimize the nuclear fallout effect if you do get hit, and most importantly, developing technology where maybe you send up a bunch of inert ballistic missiles over like the Pacific Ocean, and you just practice and get better and better technology to be able to shoot them down. Because, and once you can do that, maybe countries already have it. I don't know, and they're just waiting for a nuclear war to come out. But as soon as you have the technology to, and the amount of projectiles, whatever you're using, maybe laser guided weapons. Once you have these laser guide, or not even laser guided weapons, just lasers themselves, where you know, like the Iron Dome in Israel. Well, being able to set up those around your major cities, and in a way where like you're proven, okay, if we engage in a nuclear war, they'll be destroyed and we'll be able to shoot all of them down, or like 99.9% of them. And maybe if you take one or two nukes and you completely destroy them, maybe that's a win. And maybe not even a Pyrrhic win, just a win. You're probably going to lose a few million people. But I'm just trying to think of a way where we have this millennia of warfare where like you keep being able to just create a better weapon and defeating the enemy. And now we've reached the weapon where it doesn't seem like you'll be able to have a second chance to be able to improve upon it because it's so powerful. And so I would imagine that like the USA or Russia, or the big militaries with nuclear weapons, should be really designing weapons to shoot down ballistic missiles and hypersonic things. Does that make sense? Just
Clad with metal helmets and sealed with rubber, artillery had transformed the appearance of infantry literally beyond recognition. However, artillery was of little use if nothing could seize the trenches it was bombarding. That is where the tank came into play. These armored behemoths provided commanders a potential way to pierce defensive lines. Though notoriously unreliable, mass production allowed British and French forces to quickly wield huge numbers of these vehicles. By the end of the war, hundreds of tanks were being used simultaneously in combined arms attacks. Over a century after industrialization revolutionized society at home, man and metal advanced side by side on the battlefield. Importantly, the First World War was not won by brilliant tactics or heroic soldiers. It was won because one side could outproduce and outlast the other. Especially after the entrance of the United States to the conflict, the Entente possessed an unbeatable edge over the Central Powers. The weight of industry had firmly tipped the scales of war. The First World War demonstrated how industrial and technological advances could transform war into an unprecedented scale of destruction, with staggering human costs. The conflict set the stage for an era in which the mechanization of warfare continued to shape conflicts across the globe. Today, as seen in Ukraine, modern technologies, from drones to precise weaponry, extend the reach of war, making it deadlier while distancing those who control it. This video was produced and created in collaboration with OER Project. For more information on how OER Project offers free, comprehensive, and fully supported social studies curricula for middle and high school teachers and their students, click the link in the description.
Okay. Make sure to check that out if you need it or are interested in it. It's crazy how if a early 19th century, or say early 18th century, or early 1700s army fought an early 1600s army, I'm sure this early 1700s army would win, right? I'm not saying that 100-year difference didn't mean anything. Of course it did. But if you had an early 1900s army, a World War I army, face a Napoleonic army 100 years prior to it, it would be so insanely unmatched, unfair. And I'm just trying to think, and, you know, if you had armies today fight armies in World War I, obviously the nuclear weapon changes everything. I mean, they wouldn't stand a chance. But it's not like we're at the end of history. We're in the present. And so I'm just wondering how warfare is going to extend into the fighting in the nuclear age, right? Obviously, there have been 2 bombs dropped in warfare in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, World War II. But I'm curious how armies are thinking of ways to shoot down incredibly fast-moving nuclear weapons. I'm not sure how it's going to happen. Hopefully, it never has to be used. But you can't just... That's not a good doctrine. Well, we're not going to do it because hopefully it'll never happen. Love y'all. Hope you're all doing well. I paused quite a bit there. Would appreciate any answers to any of my questions, any comments at all. If I said something that was just wrong, I want you to call it out. Please. Hope everyone's doing well. And hopefully I'll see you guys next time. We'll keep on learning. Bye, guys.